For years and years, my grandparents used to tell me the story that I'm about to share with you. It's not a very long one, but since you've done Dogman Stories in the past, I'd like for you to tell it for me on YouTube. I had to beg my grandparents to let me share this story with you, even though I promised to leave their name and where it happened out of it. I finally convinced them to at least let me tell you that it happened in New York, the southern part, but that's all I can tell you. I was always fascinated when they told me this story, because I have always thought that werewolves and vampires are cooler than anything else. And for them to share this with me, and tell me that my belief in werewolves is actually legitimate, it's just mind-blowing to me. This happened when my mom was only 4 or 5, so that would put it around 1967. That's when it happened. She doesn't even remember it happening, other than the stories my grandparents would tell her. But here goes. When my grandparents were a lot younger, they were driving home from a friend's house late one night. My mom was asleep in the back seat. All of a sudden, as they came around a corner, this huge creature ran in front of their car on 2 legs, and the headlights illuminated it. They didn't know what it was that they were looking at. They only knew that whatever it was, wasn't supposed to exist. Being super religious, my grandma still swears that it was the devil's creation. But anyway, the creature ran across the road in front of their car, and as it did, it looked over at them. My grandpa says it looked meaner and angrier than anything he'd ever seen. For the brief second that it was in front of them, it bared its teeth, and it didn't miss a step as it ran across the road. And then, as soon as it was there, it was gone, right across the road into the night. Now, I've heard this story hundreds of times, maybe even more than that. I've heard it from both of them at once. I've heard it from my grandpa when he's alone, and I heard it from my grandma when she's alone. The description of this thing has never, ever changed, and I can describe it to you without even having to ask them. It was tall. They estimated it at 8 feet tall. It had a huge wolf head with long triangular ears and tufts of fur at the ends. Yellowish eyes that reflected the headlights and a long muzzle with a black nose, and a mouth full of long, sharp teeth. It was heavily built. Shaggy black fur, clawed hands, long legs. It looked like it was a dog leg, how they walk on their toes, giving it that backwards appearance. And it had a bushy tail that was twitching back and forth. Because my mom was in the car, and they didn't want to endanger their little girl, mixed with the fact that this thing was so massive, they sped up and just kept going. My grandpa looked in the rearview, but never saw it again. Last year, I showed them both a picture from the werewolf from Underworld Evolution. William, the first werewolf. Not the other ones in the movie. The gray one with the long snout, because that's what I've always pictured this dogman to look like. And I've heard from numerous accounts that when someone sees a dogman, the werewolf from Underworld is what they naturally go to describe it. So I pulled up the picture, and when I did, my grandma clutched her chest and closed her eyes. I honestly think she was reliving that night, and I felt bad for even showing her the picture, but I had to know. She nodded at me and said that's what she saw. Except it was black, not gray. When I showed my grandpa, he nodded too. Not as afraid as my grandma was, though. And he said, that's what was on the road that night. Once you see something like that, your mind opens up. That werewolf movie got it right. Makes you think about what those Hollywood guys really know about this world. All I know is that my grandparents did in fact see something on the road that night. They're not liars, and they have no reason to make a story up like this. They've never told anybody else besides the members of our family, so again I ask, what do they have to gain? But when my grandpa told me that night, it got me thinking. What if half or some or, God help us, most of the creature movies that we watch and think are fiction are actually based on someone's encounter? I live in Mississippi, but for privacy and security reasons, I won't tell you which part. But if you've done your Dogman research, you can probably figure out where I'm close to. It's in this area that I work as an animal control officer, and it's also where I had my encounter. It was March 12th, 2015, and I was responding to a complaint of a large dog in the area that was scaring the neighborhood people. So I go out there, expecting to find just that, a stray dog that wasn't the nicest guy in the world. I've done it 100 times. Lots of times they come with you willingly. Other times you have to use your pole because they're aggressive. It was the end of my shift, and I was hoping for one of the easier situations. I parked my truck across the street from the family that complained about the dog, and went to their house to ask a few questions. Just standard stuff like, where exactly did you see it? What did it look like? Etc., etc. They pointed out that it was on the side of the fence 2 houses down from them, at the area right before this big park. I thanked them, headed that way, using my flashlight since it was a little dark outside, and was hoping still that it was just one of those encounters where I could get the dog in the van safely. I happened to find a cat, though, that was all chewed up at this fence line, and I crouched down to inspect it. Something had really gone to town on this poor little guy. I mean, it was damn near bitten in half. I remember thinking to myself, great, paperwork and an aggressive animal, just my luck. The fence that I was at was this 6-foot wooden fence that ran the length of the street from the end of the residential line to the park. And I started hearing noises from the other side. Panting. A slight growl. I unbuckled my pepper spray that I carry and prepared to go into battle if need be. That's when I caught whiff of something gross. It smelled like old gym clothes, musty and stinky, and I got the distinct smell of wild animal urine. I grabbed the top of the fence with both hands and began to hoist myself up when these 2 huge claws grabbed the top of the fence too. I almost peed my pants, man. I let go of the fence, backing away pretty damn quickly. And I got a great look at these things. These hands were twice the size of a man's hands, way bigger than my own. They had human-like fingers, but the ends of them were all dark, and they had these sharp nails. Like one swipe could just eviscerate you. All of a sudden, this freaking werewolf just stands up and looks at me from the other side of the fence. It was a good foot, maybe even 2 feet taller than this fence, and it was looking right at me. From the look of the thing, it had an almost human expression. Like surprise, and then anger. Maybe angry that I disturbed it. I stand firm to this day that this thing actually started glaring at me. The head of this guy was huge. Bigger than any dog I've ever seen. It had these big triangular ears on top of its head, just like a German Shepherd, and a long muzzle. But this creature, it wasn't a German Shepherd, because it was way bigger than any dog could possibly be. It was jet black. It had bright yellow eyes. It growled at me and bared its teeth, which almost caused me to pass right the hell out, standing right there looking at this monster. Its teeth were long and sharp in a dirty yellow color. It snarled at me again as I backed away slowly. Then it turned and ran off. I called dispatch and said we have a problem, that a very large, very aggressive animal was on the loose and I needed backup. They sent 2 more officers, and I told them what I'd witnessed. They looked at each other, and then back at me. I was waiting for the ridicule. I knew these 2 were going to make fun of me because I described something from some movie that you'd catch on the Sci-Fi Channel late at night. But to my shock, all these guys said was, "Here we go again." The search ended up with no success, but with the levee systems around here, it could easily run far away and not be caught or seen again. Let me tell you, I hope I never see it again. This creature defied everything that I've ever believed in. I still have a hard time accepting it, and I was mere feet away from it. Where did it come from? What did it want? Why was it there? Was it that creature that killed that cat? I mean, I'm certain that it was, because I'd never seen anything tear an animal up like that before. Before that night, I would laugh at the calls that came in talking about werewolves and Dogman. I mean, like I said, you can probably tell where I came from. But now when those reports come in, and there's still a lot of them, mind you, I make sure I'm armed and have a partner before I go out to investigate. I've also learned that night around here is a time better left indoors. My name is Gabriel Santos Cabral. I'm in my 20s now, but this encounter happened when I was 6, turning 7. Back then, my family and I lived in a country stead in Londrina, Brazil. It wasn't a rural property. It was more like a country summer house, but in the city. The property was just outside the suburbs, in the northwestern part of the city, edging the city limits and nearing the country. It was an approximately 240 square meter piece of land, surrounded by 6'5" walls for privacy. The house sat in the far corner of the property, with a good view of the surroundings. 90 to 95% of the view was the whole property from the front porch of the house. The region we were living in resembles southern Missouri or northeastern Kansas, but tropical rather than temperate or subtropical. The city is a metropolitan area, with a population of 486,000 plus people. It would resemble Wichita, Kansas, or Kansas City. The landscape is fairly flat with some hills. The scenery has little vegetation, with only some parks and nature preserves, none big enough to have a decent population of any medium or large animal species whatsoever. Now understand this. There are no bears in Brazil, and the largest predator found there is the maned wolf. It's in the southern South American cougar that we have to worry about, and the jaguar, but none of which really could be identified as what I saw. My encounter was brief, but it was clear enough for me to make out the shape of this creature, like its color and size. And so now that I've bored you with these details, let me get on to my encounter. It was a Friday, October 18th. It was mid-spring. Remember, this is the southern hemisphere. And that night, it was a full moon, with relatively cloudy skies. We had something like a dozen dogs on the property, which all slept together in a large kennel on the side of the house. They'd be pretty quiet at night, but on that night, they were unsettled and spooked. One of the dogs even managed to escape the kennel and was desperately trying to get into the house. I was alone with my mom, and she asked me to turn on the floodlights. It was outside the house, and I wanted to check what was going on in the area, see what all that commotion was about. I did that and went to the front porch to scan the area, trying to see what could have scared the dogs. Staring at the corner where we had a mango tree, 90 to 120 meters away, I saw this large, grayish creature running on all fours, avoiding the lights. It passed behind the mango tree and disappeared in the dark. As I saw it, I immediately identified this creature as being a werewolf, like from the movie Bad Moon in 1996, but with a slightly larger head, a thicker snout, and a bulkier build, if you can believe it. That werewolf was the cause of many nightmares when I was a kid. And to see something like it running around flesh and blood, well, that terrified me. It was a brief sighting. It only lasted 2 to 3 seconds, but I know exactly what I saw. On its hind legs, it must have stood, at the very least, as tall as the property walls. I froze for a few seconds after seeing it, and as soon as I recovered from the shock, I sprinted as fast as I could back into the house. I locked all the doors, closed all the windows that were still open. Now, I was familiarized with werewolf movies back then. My dad was a horror buff, and we watched a lot of movies that I probably shouldn't have watched until I was older. But nonetheless, I knew what I was looking at. I was already aware of the impossibility of something being there that could shapeshift into a monster. I knew that it was fiction, but what I saw was unmistakably similar to a werewolf. Since that encounter, I started to believe in werewolves, only under the same concept of dogmen, which are natural rather than supernatural, and look that way 24/7. This term, dogman, I've adopted because it makes more sense than having some kind of man or monster that can turn into this beast under the light of a full moon. I try to look at it in the scientific way. Maybe this creature has just not been identified because it's really good at hiding from people. Only sometimes it makes itself known. Like for me that night. And that is the encounter that I had with a dogman, not a werewolf. Just like in the US, there are places where sightings are frequent. There are places in Brazil where they happen frequently. In the US, it would be Elkhorn or Taylor or Marshall. In Brazil, it's places like Joanópolis or Três Lagoas. Joanópolis has had sightings of werewolves or dogmen ever since its foundation. Its first mayor was said to be a werewolf back in the late 1800s, and the town is filled with werewolf references. Três Lagoas has had many sightings too, ever since the late 1980s and early 1990s. There was a series of lights in this small town in the 1990s where people claimed that a werewolf was roaming the streets at night after dark, trying to invade houses, climbing up on roofs and howling. All night long, this beast, whatever the hell it was scaring people's dogs and attacking livestock. And it really scared the hell out of everybody there. The state police began reinforcing night patrols and starting investigations, assuming that someone was out at night in a suit scaring people. Some cryptozoologists even collected DNA samples. As it turned out, it wasn't human DNA or that of any known animal, and it certainly wasn't artificial hair from a suit. All that makes me think that something was really there that night, terrorizing those townspeople. And maybe it was the same kind of creature I saw that night on our property. What do you think? My name is Kelly. I'm a 34-year-old woman from Ohio. I have 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. I have a husband I've been married to for 12 years. I'm a receptionist at a dental office. I'm normal, average, nothing extraordinary about me, except for the story that I have to tell you. This happened in Ohio, close to Germantown, but not in Germantown. It was dusk, not quite night yet. It was September 22nd, 2003. I was coming home from visiting my parents. My dad had a near miss with some medical issues, and 2 weeks prior to my encounter, he had had surgery. So visiting them daily was something that I was doing at that point. I was about 30 minutes from my own home on this back road when it happened. Now the road that I'm on is a curvy road, and since it was starting to get dark, I was going slower than I normally would during the day. I remember the sun setting, and it was glaring in my eyes. I was looking for a pair of sunglasses right before this happened to me. I was going even slower as I was looking for my sunglasses, and when I looked up, I saw this big mass on the shoulder of the road. At first glance, I thought it was a bush, not gonna lie. But the closer I got, I saw it was actually an animal. The first thing I thought was, what kind of coat is that? It was thick and shaggy, so I thought maybe it was a bear. Except we don't have a lot of bear in Ohio here. There's a few small populations in the state, but none where I was at. I'm not gonna lie about this either. I thought, cool, a bear. Seeing something like that in the wild, it was exciting to me. But then my eyes adjusted to this decreasing sunlight, and I got closer to this thing. My eyes focused on it, and I realized that if it was a bear, it was a badly misshapen bear. The way it was crouched down wasn't like a bear at all. In fact, it almost had this human quality to it, the way this thing was sitting. And then whatever it is, looks right up at me. This was no bear at all. It actually looked more like a wolf, but as far as I know, there are no wolves in Ohio. This thing was definitely canine-like though. From what I saw at this point, it had a long muzzle, not the short, stubby muzzle like a bear, and it had big, pointy ears and eyes that were reflecting the light. And when it looked up at me, it snarled, and I could see these giant teeth, and it just looked so mean. It had this long tail, and it looked gigantic even in that sitting position. It wasn't crouching, it was more like sitting on its side, like you would see a mermaid do in a picture. How they kind of sit with their legs off to the side position. That's what that thing was doing. Next to this thing was the body of what I can only assume was a mangled little deer. That poor thing looked like something had grabbed it and started ripping it apart. There was blood on the side of the road, like this thing had killed it right there and started to eat it. Or maybe it'd even been hit by a car and this thing found it and started eating it. I stopped my car. I was too scared to pass because I didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't know what this thing was. It bared its teeth at me again, and I could see blood on its mouth. And its teeth were covered in blood, and there were bits of flesh on its muzzle. Even sitting down like that, I knew this thing was huge. And then it shifted its body, and I thought it was going to stand up on all fours. But to my astonishment and horror, this thing stood up on 2 legs, not 4. It was taller than tall. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, and I'm not even exaggerating. It was massive muscles on top of muscles on top of muscles. It had long arms that almost went down to its knees, and it had these clawed hands at the end of the arms. The way it stood reminds me of how a canine stands, right on their toes. Its hair was dark and long and shaggy. And it just stood there, looking more human than any animal should ever look. If I wasn't mistaken, and if I didn't know better, I would say that I was looking to an honest-to-God werewolf. The hair on its chest was thinner and lighter, and I could actually see the muscles on its chest. Its thighs were bigger than any man's muscles that I've ever seen in my entire life. The hair around its head and shoulders was shaggy. It was darker than the rest of its body, and it almost looked like a mane, making this thing look even more intimidating than it already did. And then, as if I needed to be any more scared than I already was, this thing started walking towards the street until it was standing there in the road with its arms down at its sides but its palms facing me, and it was glaring at me like it was daring me to pass. At this point I was trembling because I was so scared, and I was starting to sweat. My mouth was dry, and I couldn't see or hear anything else but what was right in front of me. This thing didn't move any closer. It just stood there staring at me and baring its teeth. I watched the meat and blood dangle from its mouth, thinking that that's what was going to become of me. When it bared its fangs again, it just had this angry expression on its face. Like I stumbled upon it, or I interrupted it. I could see those huge canines, and I could swear the rest of the teeth were pointed as well. This thing looked 100% like a killing machine. It shifted over to where it was walking again on 2 legs like a normal human man. It grabbed the deer, lifted it up, and slung it over its shoulder. And then it took off into the tree line. It didn't run or move quickly. This thing just casually walked over there like it had nothing to fear, like it knew that it was on the very top of the food chain. It just grabbed that little deer and muscled it onto its shoulders and walked off. I got the intense feeling that this thing was mad as hell that I interrupted the meal, and that it had gone into the street to scare me. Maybe to scare me the other direction. It was just mad. It wasn't scared. It was inconvenienced. It wanted to go elsewhere so it could eat in peace. I sat there for a minute, staring at the trees, trying to watch where it went. But at this point, it was starting to get dark, and the sun was almost completely gone now. I couldn't see it anymore. I was afraid that it was going to circle around and rip the door from the car and turn me into its next meal. I turned back around and I went right back to my parents' house. The whole way there, I was speechless. It was like my brain was numb. I guess I was trying to comprehend what it was that I just saw. Being around Germantown, I've heard the tales and the legends of the Dogman being seen around there. Everywhere else thinks that they're just legends, except for places like Bray Road and those places in Michigan. I never gave them two thoughts that they were actually real until I saw one for myself that night. Well, let me tell you, they are incredibly 100% real. When I got back to my parents' house, they were confused as to why I was back. They could tell that I was visibly scared though, because I was still shaking. I know I had tears in my eyes. I was never good in a crisis or the bravest person in the world. My parents told me later that I was babbling about what I had seen, and I told them that I was thirsty. Other than that, they couldn't really make out anything that was going on at that point. I guess I told them everything I saw. I described the monster that I saw, and that it was feasting on a deer, and that it carried it away after it stood up and stared at me. But I don't remember telling them anything like that. I do remember later that we talked about it. We talked about what it could have been. I was convinced that I saw a werewolf, but my parents were convinced that I saw the Dogman, and admitted that sometimes they hear these weird howling noises, not close to their property but off in the distance, but still loud enough to send shivers down their spines. I was kind of mad that they'd never told me anything like that before, but I guess they were trying to protect me and the kids because they didn't want to scare us or risk us not coming over anymore. I still have to drive down that road sometimes, but I try to avoid driving down it if I can. If I have to, I'll go out of my way to avoid that road, even if it means adding extra time to my commute. Luckily, I've never seen that thing again, but believe me, I am very aware of all my surroundings every single time I'm on that road. In fact, anywhere near that road, I'm on high alert. I tried to almost never drive that road with my children in the car, unless it's in the middle of the day. I'll actually go very far out of my way to avoid driving down that road at night if my kids are in the car. You hear all these stories about people witnessing these creatures or other creatures they can't identify. Things that shouldn't really exist. Fairy tales. Make-believe stories. You'd never expect you'd be the one that has an encounter. You'd never expect to be the one emailing somebody that they don't even know, telling them to share this story so other people can be informed about what's really out there. Thank you for sharing it. I don't like talking about it myself, so if you want to talk about it, be my guest. I'll stay in my house at night. When my encounter happened with a Dogman, it happened in Louisiana, about an hour out of Mississippi. It was in 1998 in the middle of the night. My name's Garrett. I'm in my early 60s now, and at that point, I'd been driving trucks for about 15 years. Most of the time, it was only in Louisiana. I was driving all those trucks to make a living. On occasion, though, I'd be contracted to drive to different states. I called these the long ones. I've been married to my wife for 20 years. We had 5 children, hence the reason that I had to take up the long ones and make money to support my family. It wasn't that bad, though. I'd listen to the radio during the day, and when I got tired, I had a bunk above my cab. I packed the essentials for the long ones: pillows, pictures of my family, the good book, and a sawed-off shotgun, just in case. Although I never actually needed to pull the trigger on that gun. I got used to driving till about midnight sometimes. Other times, I'd stretch it to even 1 o'clock in the morning. But that was back then, when I was a young buck. Then I'd pull into a rest stop, or even just a parking lot, take a nap to get some shut-eye. On this occasion, I pulled into a truck stop. It looked run down, and it was in the middle of nowhere. When I pulled in, there were 3 other vehicles, 1 rig, and 2 small cars. I ate the rest of the food that I had bought for dinner, and I got out to pee. Now this place was very, very out in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing else around it for a few miles. This was an area full of thick trees and fields, and that's about it. And when I say truck stop, I don't mean these fancy ones nowadays like Pilot. This was literally somewhere where a truck could pull over so the driver could get some shut-eye. And one really disgusting run-down bathroom. There were a couple of lights that illuminated the rest stop, but the light that was right outside of the john was broken. Of course. When I was doing my business, though, I was hit with the worst smell that I've ever smelled in my entire life. It was this rancid odor, like something wild hadn't been bathed in a very, very long time. Like blood and poop and wild animal. It happens in places like these sometimes. They're just not kept up, and the people passing through don't bother to take care of their business the way that I did. Sometimes there's nobody out there to clean them for a very long time, so places like this can sometimes have that horrible smell and be pretty disgusting. I went back to my bunk, talked with God for a little bit, and then I went to sleep. I woke up later to this bump at the driver's side door. At first, I woke up thinking maybe it was my imagination, or that I was dreaming. But then, I stopped and listened, and I heard the thump again. Someone was definitely at the door. Naturally, I thought I was being robbed. I grabbed the sawed-off shotgun. I sat up and called out to whoever was out there. "Listen, friend, I have a gun in here. I don't want to use it, but if you force me to, I will. I don't have any money to rob. Just go away and mind your own business." The noises of this person trying to get in stopped, but I could hear this growling noise. I squinted to get a better look in the dark since there was only a few lights out there illuminating the darkness, and the driver's side door was facing away from them. What I thought I saw wasn't possible. What I saw looked like dog ears on a forehead full of fur. I got the gun ready. I didn't know what in the world was happening. Something out there was trying to get in. I could actually hear the door being jiggled, like it was trying to open the handle. Thank God I remembered to lock the doors. That noise stopped, and then all of a sudden, I heard this big thump on the roof, and movement around there. What in the world could have gotten up there without me hearing it climb? I started praying for strength and courage and protection. I heard this long, scratching noise on the roof like claws on metal. And then I heard it at the door too. Something was still trying to get in. And that's when I thought to myself, there's 2 of these things out there. Now what you need to know about me is I'm a realistic man. Seeing is believing. Of course, I have my faith in God. He's my Father and my King, but I don't believe in other things like that unless they're mentioned in the Bible. So the thought of something that looks like a big dog or wolf out there was beyond me. The only thing I could think was that it was two punks out there dressed up in suits trying to scare the daylights out of me. So I called out again. I know you punks are out there, and like I said, I don't want to use this gun, but if you force me to, I will defend myself. This time, though, when I called out, the sounds actually didn't stop. All of a sudden, all hell broke loose. I saw lights flashing. I heard a horn blaring. Someone was out there in their car making all kinds of a ruckus. Then, the punk who was on the roof leapt off of it, and he was big enough for me to feel it actually leap off of the roof and cause the cab to shake. It was at that point I realized that maybe something else was going on here. After a minute or two, somebody called out to see if I was okay. It was a younger man that looked pretty shaken up. He asked if we could go somewhere where more people would be, and for some reason or another, I just had this profound trust in him. I followed him to a 24/7 gas station, and he told me the story of what he saw. He told me his name was Jake. He had pulled in after a long night of driving. He saw these creatures, yes, creatures, attacking my rig. He called them creatures. I remember just thinking, what in the heck are you talking about, my friend? He said the creatures that he saw were big, as in tall, and very muscular, and they looked like wolves running around on two legs. He referred to them as werewolves, but I shook my head and said, son, those things don't exist. He shook his head back at me and said, let me tell you something. What I saw attacking your vehicle, they were werewolves, unless you can describe something else that looks just like them. He said when he shined his headlights at them, he could see them very well, because at first, he too thought it was somebody messing with my truck, just trying to break in, and he wanted to lend a helping hand for another trucker. But when the lights hit these creatures, he knew it was something else entirely. These things were covered in hair, and taller than your average person. I mean a lot taller. He said they had long ears and long muzzles, clawed hands, and big, thick, strong legs. They had these tan-colored furs, was shaggy, and their eyes reflected yellow in the headlights. He said he flashed his high beams to scare them off, and one of them actually blocked the lights out of its eyes with these hands, and that's when he got a good look at those claws. Yeah, this fellow described them as hands. I was thinking to myself that he must be nuts, but I was starting to think also that I didn't have another explanation for what had happened. I mean, after all, I did see the top of one of their heads, right? When he shined the lights on them, these things bared their teeth, and they ran off on two legs, faster than any human being was capable of. The size of the steps were enormous. When he saw the second one run off from the other side of the big rig and run into the tree line with the other one, he was dumbfounded. I commented that must have been the guy that jumped off the roof, but he shook his head and said no. Those were the two that were out there on the ground, circling your rig. The third one didn't jump off until a couple of seconds after that. And now I know why he was so shaken up. I thought maybe there were two, but there was a third. I was downright flabbergasted. There was a third one out there that I had no idea about. I told him it had to have been people in costumes, but again, this gentleman shook his head. No way. The way these things moved, they were faster than any person I'd ever seen in my life. When the third one jumped off the roof, it jumped farther than any man possibly could, landed on its feet with the grace of a cat, and ran into the woods with the rest of the pack. And the way it ran was like a dog, putting weight on its toes. No man runs like that. No man can even fake that. I must have thanked Jake a dozen times. We talked for a couple hours about what he had seen, what I witnessed, and I came to the conclusion that There are things out there that the Bible doesn't mention, or maybe the Bible just refers to them as demons and we don't exactly know what they look like. I know a lot of people out there have their own opinion about what these things are, but as a man of faith, I have my opinions too. And it's okay if our opinions don't match up, because the important thing is knowing that these things really are out there. Who really cares what they are? You just gotta be safe. Make sure that they don't kill you. Jake came to the conclusion that they were werewolves that we witnessed, but I don't believe in werewolves. Jake put these creatures that were on the ground at least 9 feet tall. That would explain why I could see the ears on the tops of one of their heads. I've done a lot of research about these dogmen that people claim to have seen now, and 7 or 8 feet tall seem to be the average height. Is it possible that a 9-foot tall one is just fully grown, or maybe a bigger member of its species? Maybe the 9 feet tall is just an exaggeration that our minds are playing on us. I did find scratches on the sides of my truck in the green paint by the doors, both on the driver's side and the passenger. I still go on drives, but I'm retiring soon, and I'm very happy about that. Not because I'm afraid of seeing one of these creatures again. I've just put in all my due time and it's time to relax. I believe that this man intervened by the grace of God. I don't think he's my guardian angel or anything like that. I just think that the Father put him in the right place at the right time, and I thank him for that every day. I know it goes without saying, but I'm glad I made it out of there alive and got to go home to my family, who, by the way, believe everything that I told them. I have no reason to lie. I'm not sharing my last name or my exact location. Just know that it was almost on the border of Louisiana and Mississippi. I'm told these things usually run wild around here. I don't know why. I hope you take that into consideration and keep me in good faith knowing that what I tell you is the truth. Thank you for reading this, and thank you for being open about your situations as well. I know you've seen some stuff too. I hope everybody listening has a good night, keeps an open mind, and if you're in a situation like this, maintain a level head and get out of there safely. Again, thank you for taking the time to read this, Supernaturalist. And thank you, Creatures of the Night, for taking time to listen to an old man's story. There are 2 times in my life I have been scared to death. Once while I was a member of the armed forces during the Gulf War, and the other when I ran into what I thought at the time was a true-to-life werewolf. I don't talk much about either of these times. I never really talk about my time in the Gulf War. Just know this. When the explosion happened near me, I thought I went deaf. The noise, the flash of light, was brilliant. And then I thought I was dead. By the grace of God, I was barely even injured, but the fear I felt in that moment has only been felt once after that in my life. Everything else just seems trivial. That's as much as I'll talk about the war. My encounter with the supernatural creature is a different story. You sent me a dozen questions, and I'll answer them all, and then give you some extra information that you didn't ask for. For starters, my name is Boggs. Last name, not first. But nobody calls me by my first name anyways. I was 26 years old when I went to the Gulf, and 43 years old when I had my encounter. It happened in the Daniel Boone National Forest. That's in Kentucky. It was around 7:30 in the morning, August 7th. After the war, I started going out to the woods all over the U.S. as part of a therapy for myself. You'll never hear anything as loud as combat. The woods are the opposite of that. Serene. Quiet. Just what I needed. It was the 3rd day I was there, and the 3rd hike I was taking. I used to wander in the woods for hours at a time. I loved it out there, and still do. Although now I don't get out as much since age is catching up to me quicker than I'd like. The 2 days before this, I had walked in 2 different directions from my campsite. This is when you could go find yourself a nice quiet spot in the woods and not see another person the whole time that you were out there. It was heaven. The day of the encounter, I was going in yet another direction, just walking as the crow flies. Anywhere I went, I would just keep walking. I'd cross streams, climb over fallen trees, hike up hills or cliffs, and this occasion was no different. I'd been walking about an hour already, and at this point, I'd already covered a few miles. The first thing I noticed was this really bad smell, like rotting innards. I just figured there was some animal somewhere close that had died and started to decompose. I didn't stick around that smell for too long though. Not only was it nasty, but I didn't want to stumble across anything's meal and have a wild animal to deal with. If I'd only known. So I just kept walking, maybe another 5 to 10 minutes until I smelled it again. I knew I couldn't still be smelling the same thing that I'd caught a whiff of earlier. I'd already walked too far away. And then something else struck me funny in this situation. Normally, as I'd noticed the last 2 days, there were birds of all kinds making noise. Bugs chirping away, other sounds of wildlife. But now there was nothing making any type of noise at all. And then I heard something breathing. It was deep and heavy, like something really big. It took me a moment to pinpoint where it was coming from, and then I noticed this movement in the bushes to my right. These bushes were about 6 feet tall, maybe higher. They were taller than me. I'm 5'10". This thing was perfectly covered by those bushes. I couldn't make it out at first, but I could make out a distinct color difference between the bushes and the mass behind it. There was a light gray in color. It was in contrast to the green of the bushes and the trees. I was as tall as the bushes. It wasn't a mountain lion or anything like that. It was way too tall for that. The top of this thing was bobbing back and forth like its head was moving around on its neck, like maybe it was trying to watch me without revealing itself. I stood there, motionless, not scared, but definitely alarmed. I didn't know what this thing was at first, so I yelled out to it, "Hey, I don't want any trouble. I'm just out here for a walk, and I have a weapon." I was hoping if it was a person I could scare him off. This thing stopped moving when I yelled. It was confirmation for me that there was definitely something alive behind those bushes. But I was lying. I didn't have a weapon on me. In fact, I don't even own a gun anymore. This thing actually backed away from the bushes, keeping out of sight. I could tell it was someone or something hunched over by the way that it moved. It also didn't turn around, it backed away. After that, I couldn't hear the breathing sounds anymore. But the forest didn't come back to life either. I stood there in the same spot for several minutes, maybe even a full 10 minutes, just listening for the sounds of this being to come back, looking around my surroundings the whole time. If this was a person, why the hell were they acting so weird? If it was an animal, I wasn't going to be caught off guard and be attacked. When enough time had passed, I continued my hike. I know a lot of you are thinking, how dumb of an idea was that? Not to mention the fact that I was alone and unarmed. But, like I said, these hikes, they just mean everything to me. They were my release, and if anybody's out there listening that has served this wonderful country, you'll know that you need that release. So I just kept walking, determined not to let some weird encounter ruin my time. For all I knew, it was just some random weirdo watching me from the bushes, or maybe it was somebody that didn't want me to know he was there because he didn't want to talk to me. Maybe he was shy. Who knew? At that point, nothing else weird was going on. But let me tell you, right here and now, it was definitely something weird that was watching me, but not a person. definitely not a person. It was another 15 minutes or so before I'd have another encounter. I don't think it was the same one. Let me tell you that. I full-heartedly believe that there's more than one of these creatures out there, and I had the misfortune of running into two different ones. I heard this grunt, like a deep-chested grunt from something large, and I knew immediately that I was in trouble. It was just this gut feeling that I had. The sound came from my right, and I looked over, catching a glimpse of this thing. It was in the bushes, just like the other one, but this was a very dark gray, not the lighter gray that I'd seen before. But this time, I saw what it was, and like I said before, it looked like a werewolf to me. It was canine. 100% I'm sure of this. But this thing was bipedal. It was built, I mean really built, like a bodybuilder. Even through that shaggy hair, I could see the muscles of this creature. It had long arms that had clawed hands at the end. Not paws exactly, more like raccoon hands. It looked to me like it had fingers. Its neck was thick and muscular too, and it had the head of a wolf. We're talking muzzle, ears, teeth, predatory eyes, the whole nine. And it had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, which now, after researching Dogman like I have, that's actually a pretty small specimen. Let me tell you this though, it could have been 4 feet tall, and I would have still been afraid of this thing. It was a wolf thing, walking around on 2 legs after all, right? It took 1 step forward and tilted its head like it was curious. I was frozen to the spot. It sniffed the air and growled at me. It never took its eyes off me, not once. I had 2 thoughts go through my mind in that time. The first, this isn't what I saw before, so there might be another one out there. And 2, how fast could this thing move? Now I know, running from a wild animal is the last thing you should do, but it was the best of my options. The other being trying to defend myself and fend this thing off, which I doubted would have a happy ending. Even as strong and in shape as I was back then, I doubt I could last long against this thing. My other option, being eaten, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let that happen. I started to back away slowly, but this thing didn't move at first. Then it slowly started following me. I turned and ran for my life. As I did, I saw this thing go down on all 4s and start to follow me. Back then, I had a lot of stamina. I liked to work out. I was hiking and running all the time, so I wasn't too worried about running myself out, but I was definitely concerned with this thing catching up to me. I didn't waste my time looking back. I knew it was giving chase. I didn't need to see how close it was getting. I could hear the footfalls of this thing, and it was making this yapping noise like a high-pitched cry of excitement. My blood ran cold, because I heard another one coming off to the side behind me too. Now there were 2 of them. They were both making that yapping noise like they were communicating to each other during a hunt. I ran flat out for all I was worth. I leapt over logs, got all scratched up from the bushes. I mean, this was downright running for my life, and I was committed to living. I don't know if they tired out. I doubt it. Maybe they got bored. But eventually the yapping stopped, and I couldn't hear them chasing me anymore. That didn't slow me down though. I ran all the way back to my truck, got in, and got the hell out of there. My lungs were on fire at this point. I was drenched in sweat, but you know what? I was alive. When I got out of there, I pulled off to the side of the road, and I just sat there in my truck for so long that I lost track of time. I don't know what I was waiting for. I guess since I was still in the forest, maybe I was waiting for them to show themselves again? Or since there were 2 of them, maybe I was waiting for another one to appear. They were communicating to each other like they were hunting partners, so maybe they were part of a pack. I don't know. Maybe I just felt safe in my truck. Then curiosity started to hit me. I thought for a brief moment of going back, but I thought, hell with that. I don't remember driving back to town after that. All time is lost on me. When I got back, I think I was in shock. I told my buddy about it, and he knew I'd never make shit like that up. He asked me what I thought they were, and I told him they had to be werewolves. Being naive to these things at that point, I remember telling him that they had to be something else, though, because it was the morning and there wasn't a full moon. Can you believe that? Thinking these things could be werewolves. Everybody here knows what I saw. It was a dogman. After a lot of research, that's when I found out about them. I saw what people described, just like the thing I did, and I knew for certain that's what I saw. I've probably watched everything I can on the subject, especially here on YouTube, since the encounters are so numerous. I've listened to all your Dogman stories, and I think you would be the best to tell my encounter. I just like your enthusiasm. It took me a long time to put this encounter into words. I lost some sleep the night I wrote this out to you. Just thinking back on all the details made me pretty jumpy. Drank that night too, not gonna lie. I think these two I encountered were juveniles based on their size. I think they were playing with me, like a cat plays with a mouse. Not in the sense of a dog chasing a ball. I often wonder, still to this day, what would have happened if they decided to catch me. I doubt I outran them. I'm no fool. I know how fast these creatures can move. Maybe they were running me out of their territory. I have a lot of theories. I'm excited to hear what you and your subscribers think. One of my other leading theories is that maybe these two were actually female, and that's why the size difference was there. Maybe they chased me out of there because that was their nesting area, and their den was close by. Maybe they were just protecting their young. I'd like to think that they're smart enough to know that I didn't mean them any harm, and they were just trying to get me out of a certain area so they can protect their pack. I guess it's whatever helps me sleep at night, right? I have two Dogman stories for you, but before we get to all that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I've always been intrigued by werewolves ever since I saw the movie Wolfman, the 1941 version. I was 6 years old. I liked the whole myth behind the beast and always believed in them, but there was always something in the back of my head that said otherwise. They can't be real. 2 or so years ago, I started listening to Wolfman encounters from different channels on YouTube, as well as online blogs where people posted their encounters. The encounters I'm going to share are two different occasions, but they are both with the same one person in both my encounters. My nickname is King. I don't want to share my real name, just because I don't take being made fun of lightly, and I want to avoid any problems with the law. I'm Mexican, and I've been in Texas almost my whole life. I'm 26 years old, and these are my encounters. My first encounter happened when I was 15. We were at one of my homeboy's grandpa's ranches outside of Houston, Texas, having a small barbecue with carne asada, shooting around and just relaxing. The ranch is a 5,000-acre property, and I'd say 93% of it is woods. There's only about 80 acres cleared to make up for the house, stables, and chicken coops. Altogether, I'd say there were about 48 people that night the first encounter happened. Among all of us were the ranch owners, who were my homeboy's grandparents, my homeboy's parents, and my homeboy, who we'll call Jose for the stories. About 4 other homies and their girlfriends, and the rest were ranch workers and their wives. We were all talking and laughing, having fun, when we started to talk about scary stories and encounters. We'd already ate and were just relaxing with a beer and smoking out behind the house by the barbecue grill. It's about 4 a.m. and everything seemed normal until we noticed the dogs at the ranch start circling us, looking into the woods directly in front of us. They were all pit bulls trained to take down boar. They were growling and barking, ready to attack. We turned to look towards where the dogs were looking, and we saw two yellow-orange eyes at about 90 feet from us, at the height of about 4 feet. We didn't know what it was. Now, all of us have been all over every square inch of this property, during the day, the night, even overnight, and we've never seen anything like it. They didn't look like a coyote's eyes. They were way too high and big to be a coyote's. We all went quiet and just stared in the direction these eyes are. And then we heard Jose's grandpa say in Spanish, "Son los mismos ojos," which translates to, "It's the same eyes." Jose's father, myself and a ranch worker, turned around to look at him and saw him grab his AK at that moment, and he turned to me and nodded in approval. I picked up my .357 from the table and stood up and took aim at whatever that thing was. I was aiming for the eyes area, and I swear I felt like this thing redirected its attention to me. I know it wasn't more than a split second, but it felt like a few minutes passed by, and to be completely honest, I was a little bit scared. Here I was, looking at something I knew nothing about, a creature that stood 4 feet tall and had been looking at us for who knows how long. A creature I didn't know its size, its weight, how fast it could move. I didn't know anything about it. I knew if I missed, which I highly doubted, it would launch itself at us, and we had enough ammunition on us to take it down, but I was still a little scared. As I was beginning to squeeze the trigger, the eyes raised or elevated or something off the ground. They didn't wobble or twitch. It was a smooth, single motion. Only way I could describe it would be when you're crouching and your whole weight is being supported on your toes. Then you begin to get up slowly and the eyes elevate to what I would say would be 8 feet or 9 feet tall. And I swear I felt my hand shake before re-aiming for the eyes and firing a shot. Before I was able to, I heard Jose tell me, "Ready when you are, King," and at the same moment, I fired my shot. Jose's grandpa fired his AK. I fired 2 shots, and he probably let go 10 rounds, and the eyes were gone. I never saw those eyes move at all. All I know is that they were gone. We heard trees shake and branches break as it got further and further, and that was that. By the time I shot the second round, the eyes were not there anymore, and everyone was standing up now, guns in hand, and halfway in aimed position. After a few seconds, when everything calmed down, Jose's dad asked his grandpa, "Was that the same thing?" To which he replied, "Yes." He then walked to the cooler and proceeded to get another beer and ask if anyone wanted another one. That's when Jose told him in Spanish, "Grandpa, if you were serious when you told me the stories of the beast you encountered, you have to tell us what you know so we can be prepared for the next time it comes." His grandpa just sighed and sat down. One thing I would like to point out is that this man is a serious person. Real old-school Mexican. No jokes, no lies. Nowadays, he plays with his grandchildren, but he still has that seriousness to him. He was in both the American and Mexican army. Never have I heard him lie about anything, not even to cover our ass about anything. After a swig of his Corona, he told us that he encountered what he believed those eyes belonged to 3 times before that night. He called it a werewolf. First time, he was in Sinaloa, when he was 15 years old out in the Sierra. He was attacked by it while hunting with his father and 3 cousins. They shot at it, but missed. The second time, he was 21 and in Houston, Texas. He saw it on the side of the road, but only for a split second. He said it felt like their eyes locked onto each other's. And then the last time he saw it, he was 40, and it was outside of New Mexico. They were camping, him and his wife. That one charged at them and chased them all the way from the campsite to the tree line before the parking area. He told us that this thing took 3 shots from a 9mm to the chest area, and it didn't do more than flinch. Now this night would be the 4th time he encountered it. He believes they're all different creatures, not the same one. Why they come to him, he doesn't know. We stayed there for another 2 hours, some of us talking, others still trying to comprehend what had happened, and then little by little, we all went to sleep. Although I doubt any of us really slept that night. Jose, his grandpa, his dad, and myself were the last 4 to stay outside, and hadn't said a single word for close to 15 minutes, when Grandpa broke the silence by asking, "Are you guys afraid?" We looked at each other, and I was the one who spoke out. I told them exactly what I felt when I took aim at it. I could tell everyone was surprised, especially coming from me, as I have never choked or thought twice about pulling the trigger. But then Grandpa told me he was scared to fire at it when they were camping too. The next day, around 2 p.m., we were all waking up, and a ranch worker, 2 more of my homies, Jose and I, went to the area where we saw the eyes. We didn't find any trace of blood, but what we did find were the holes the AK rounds made in the trees, and prints all over the place. They looked like dog prints, but completely massive. I wear a size 13 shoe, and these prints were just as big as my boots. Jose's grandpa was on his way out, and he gathered all of us and told us to never ask him about that night, and that now we all know why he's so strict on us not leaving the house without a gun at the ranch. After he left, my homeboys, all the workers, and I agreed that we'll keep an eye out for it, for whatever those eyes belong to, and if we encounter them again, we'd use every single round at this ranch to kill it. We haven't talked about that or witnessed anything else at the ranch, not since that day, but everyone is still on alert at the ranch, day or night. Everyone there is careful and aware of their surroundings. Years later, I had a second encounter with this thing. To this day, I can't go outside the house at night without imagining that that thing is out there. This happened in Spicewood, Texas. We just moved to Lakeway from Austin, and we'd been here for a couple of months when I was leaving a client's home where I was doing some irrigation system repairs. I got a call from Jose, and we talked for a couple of minutes when I heard a saw turn on in the background. I asked if he was still working, and he replied yes. I saw the clock in my truck, and it was around 7 p.m. I told him to send me the address, and I'd go over and help for a few hours. Spicewood is roughly 15 minutes from Lakeway if you take the back roads through the hills, but I was already on the main road, so I just continued my way, which threw me off about an extra 10 minutes or so. By this time, it's starting to get somewhat dark, and I arrived at the house around 7:30 or so. The layout of the property is a little difficult to explain, but I'll try my best as the layout's pretty important to this story. The house is located in a court, and it's the only house there. The last house before the one Jose was working on was about 5 minutes or so back up the road, and that's 5 minutes driving at 55 miles per hour on country roads, so it's pretty far away. The main road goes downhill from the last house all the way up to the court, and the driveway makes an extremely wide U-shape right off of the road, and the main house is about 300 feet into the property along the driveway. The house Jose was remodeling was about 800 to 1,000 feet into the property, and by this time the driveway had a retaining wall on the left side as the driveway also goes downhill. It ends in the garage for a guest house. The retaining wall is about 10 to 12 feet tall, and there's a patch of trees in between the main road and the driveway. It's about 150 feet wide by about 1,000 feet long, and connects to the woods behind the garage and the guest house. To get to the guest house from the garage, it's a walk of around 40 feet down cement steps leading to the first story of the house, which is about 50 feet or so down from the driveway to another level of the property. Now, the way Jose had parked his truck and trailer, I couldn't park any closer than 500 feet from the garage, and there were only 3 lights illuminating the driveway. One was from the main road, but most of that light was blocked out by trees. The second was on the front door of the main house, and the last one was on the garage. It wasn't well lit by any means, but I had enough light to navigate my way through the driveway. I got to the house and started helping around. About an hour into working, we were listening to music and talking when I started to get this uneasy feeling. I can't really explain it. I just felt like something was wrong. I looked out the third-story window and just looked out into the trees when all of a sudden I heard Jose ask, "You good, cuz?" To which I answered, "I'm good. Just got a weird feeling for some reason." I honestly didn't know how to explain it to him, but I felt like someone was looking at me through the window, which of course was impossible. The closest house was a good 30 minutes away on foot. Nobody would be out here walking just because, and the main house was empty as the people there were out in Italy visiting the in-laws. It just felt weird, but familiar. And then I told him, and he said, "You mean like the night at the ranch, King?" And then it hit me. It was exactly like that feeling at the ranch when I saw the yellow eyes. I turned to look at him, and he said, "I've felt it twice before. Never told the workers, but when we stay late at night, I don't let them go out just in case." I asked him if he thought he was being hunted, but he just laughed. We turned back to the window, and I wanted to see if I could see anything. He was walking to the light switch, turned the lights off, and closed the door. The room was in complete darkness, and we stood there looking for the eyes, but we never saw anything. After a couple of minutes, Jose asked if I had my gun on me, to which I replied no. He took one of his twin H&K VP9s from behind his waist and handed it to me. I just stuck it in my back and walked out of the room to continue working. At 10:30, he told everyone to start cleaning up and picking up the tools. By 10:50, we were out the door and chilling on the porch when one of the workers asked if any of us had a lighter. Nobody did, but I told him I had one in the truck. As I made my way to the truck, I started to get that weird feeling again, but I remembered I had Jose's gun, and my .357 mag was in the truck, so I just ignored it. I made my way up the cement steps, up the driveway. When I was halfway to the truck, I heard what sounded like panting, and a dog, maybe semi-running in the trees. That was behind the driveway. I somewhat ignored it, as I'm not scared of any big dogs, and if worse came to happen, I could just scare him with a shot. I kept walking towards my truck when I saw a big black dog come running out from the trees. Made the 10-foot drop from the trees to about 10 feet from the bed of the truck like it was nothing, and just started sniffing the air. Now I've been around many large breed dogs, and seen lots of dog shows on Animal Planet, as well as the world's biggest dog videos on YouTube, and this dog looked like nothing I had ever seen before. It had pointed ears like a Doberman, but the body was all wrong. It looked much too wide and bulky, and it just paced from left paw to right paw, sniffing the air as I continued to get closer. In a way, I guess you could say I was amazed. This big, bulky dog was just so beautiful. I love pit bulls, and I love how their muscles show with the right feeding and exercise, so I wanted to get closer to this dog. I guess my mind had just completely forgotten about our encounter and how I had been feeling part of the night. I walked closer and closer until I was about 30 feet away from this thing, and it must have smelled me because it stopped immediately, turned his head slightly to the side, and that's when I realized I screwed up. This dog had a big giant wolf head on it, like an extra wide German Shepherd head. Then it turned not just its head but its whole body, pivoting on his left rear paw, and from the little light I got from the road I was able to make out part of its detail. I was mesmerized to see a giant wolf-like creature there, but still couldn't see its details, so I reached for my keys and clicked the unlock button on my keyless entry remote. The rear lights turned on and I was able to see it a little better. And that's when it started sniffing and getting closer to me, and it slowly kinda went from forelegs to a crouching-like position on its hind legs. Then it reached to grab onto the bed of the truck, and its hand, yeah, hand, a 4-finger, 1-thumbed hand, came closer to me. It was about 10 feet away when it stopped and just looked at me, looking at me from head to toe and then back up, like it was not being aggressive in any way. It was just more like it was analyzing me. At that moment, I slowly reached for the gun on my back, and as I did that, this thing slowly stood up, easily towering over me at about 9 feet tall. As I brought the gun to my side, I took advantage of those few seconds to analyze it, and realized that it was a he. It was a black color and fur, with gray coloring on its chest area and hands. His head was like that of a wolf, but proportionately enlarged, maybe 2 or 2.5 times the normal size of a wolf head. He had pointed ears and a long muzzle, big, circular yellow eyes exactly matching those at the ranch that we saw. He didn't growl or make any threatening facial movements. His arms were long, but muscular, and they ended in those long claws. I could tell that whatever he grabbed onto would easily get shredded into pieces. No doubt about that. His legs were thick and big, perfect for resistance and carrying his weight around. The legs were bent back like a dog's legs and also ended in gigantic rear paws, not feet. It did have a bushy tail, like that of a wolf or maybe a golden retriever. By the time I had finished analyzing it, I had the gun in both hands and was looking at him in the eyes. Then, this thing looked down towards my hands and squinted its eyes slightly, then raised its eyes back up to my face, nodded, and if saying no, with a deep growl. It smelled like wet grass, and moss, and wet dog. I was that close to it. It was pungent. That's when I honestly got scared, and for a slight second, I thought this was it for me. Did he know what I had in my hands? Did he comprehend that it was a gun? Did he know that this thing fired bullets? He sure acted like he did. When he eyed that thing and then growled, I got the distinct impression he knew exactly what a gun was. Just how smart were these things? As I was thinking these questions, I switched the gun from my right hand to the left and proceeded to place it on the hood of my truck, which I was right next to. As soon as I let go of my gun, he let out the deepest, loudest howl I have ever heard. It was so deep and loud I felt it in my chest as if it was a pair of subs, and my ears hurt from the howl. I had to cover my ears with both hands, and then he leapt over the bed of my truck. He cleared it as he ran out into the backyard of the main house, and then disappeared into the woods behind the property. He was fast. Hell, he was more than fast. He was unbelievable. So agile and swift for his size. By the time he disappeared into the woods, Jose was running towards me with his gun in hand, looking everywhere and clearing the area. He asked me with a shaky voice what that was, and I told him it's what his grandfather had warned us about. I didn't want to give details, as his workers were there. When we heard another howl coming from behind us, and another one in front of us overlapping the previous one, we knew that there was more than one. It doesn't take a genius to know one ran to the right, and there was no way he was howling behind and in front of us at the same time. So all of us got in our trucks and got the hell out of there. Jose followed me back into Oak Hill, and we stopped at a bar for a much-needed bottle or two while I explained what happened. We called his grandpa, who was in Sinaloa at the time, but he wasn't at his property at the time. When he finally returned our call, I was already home, but still talked to him about it, and we believe it was probably a different one than the one we encountered at the ranch. For the next 3 weeks or so, I woke up to the slightest noise. It was hell, as our AC came on close to 4 times a night. I couldn't walk outside the house at nighttime without thinking that that thing was out there. My worst fear is that he's out there and tries to come inside while my family's home and I'm not. I talked to my son, as well as my homeboy's kids, about what happened at the ranch all those years ago, as well as my recent encounter, and they believe me. They all promise to be alert at the ranch, and that if they ever see yellow eyes, they all form a circle protecting each other's backs. Walk towards the house, and let us know immediately. I don't know if it's men turning into walking wolves, or a whole different species not yet discovered, or what, but what I do know is that that thing recognized my gun as a weapon and showed signs of disliking it as soon as he saw it. They seem to be masters at hunting. At least, that's what they look like they're built for. And from the way those other howls were spread out. They basically had us cornered from three sides. The side they left open was the woods, and my guess is probably because they would get in there and get us before we were able to get to safety. I got a hold of 3 people I know that are Native American and told them my experiences. All 3 of them come from different tribes, and they all had their own take based on their history. But the thing all 3 of them told me was this was the werewolf that protects the tribe. He guards the area, making sure no threat comes to us. He knew you were not an enemy, so he didn't have a reason to attack you. When he saw the weapon, he simply asked for you to put it away, and you did. So he called off the ambush, and they went their way to keep guarding the land. Now I don't know if Spicewood has any links to Native Americans. I don't know if it was a father and brothers protecting their families or what, but I do know that if any of them comes looking for trouble here, any type of bad intention, they won't be as nice this time. Since my encounter, I've called off the kill-on-sight order at the ranch, and will let these creatures just be themselves. If they are enemies, we'll take care of them the only way we know how. If they were just protecting their own, we understand them 100%. And if they were protecting the land, we get that too. We'll stay out of their way. When I asked Grandpa again about his encounters, he said the first one he encountered, he didn't get too good of a look at it. He couldn't make out its details, or anything, but the second one looked like Michael from Underworld. The third one looked like the Underworld werewolf too. That's the one that took the 3 9mm bullets to the chest and kept chasing them. What's it take to take these suckers down? The best way I could describe the one I saw at the house would be like the one from Van Helsing, when he turns into a werewolf, you know, but slightly more muscular. Other than that, it was exactly the same. It looked like him so much that a couple of nights ago, that movie was being shown on the Sci-Fi Channel. My brother was in my room watching it while I was asleep, and when I woke up and saw the wolf sharpening its claws, I reached for my gun under my pillow and almost shot the damn TV. I was scared for the rest of the night. Thanks for reading my story. I've heard a lot of people not wanting to disclose the locations for fear of visitors or people hunting these things, but honestly, I don't think it's something to worry about. These things can most definitely handle themselves.